Hello and welcome to another fabulous Constitution video. Today we're going to be talking about the basic principles of the United States Constitution. These are foundational, fundamental ideas upon which our Constitution and our government was created. So let's start talking about popular sovereignty. So sovereignty is a term that we discussed in our first unit. We said that sovereignty means that you have the power within a certain area, okay? So whenever I think of the term sovereignty, I always think of a sovereign leader, like a leader with a crown. So popular sovereignty then is the idea or the notion that the people have governing power within our boundaries. So popular sovereignty means people have the power. So what is popular sovereignty? How do we exercise that? Whenever we go to the polls and we vote, whether it's at the local level, the state level, the federal level, we are exercising popular sovereignty. We are in charge of our government, and we exercise that right through voting for people to represent us. We also have the concept of federalism, with which you are very familiar at this point in the year, but just in case you're not. Federalism, what? Federalism, what? A division of what? Of power between the states and the federal government. Yeah. So just in case you didn't catch that, a federal system like we have today is where we have a division of power between the state and the federal government. So there are some things that our federal or our national government can do, and then there are some things that our state and local governments can do. And they also have concurrent powers, which we'll talk about in a couple of chapters, which are things that they can both do, okay? Another basic principle of our Constitution is that of limited government. Now, in our first unit, we talked about the concept of constitutional governments as opposed to governments with a constitution. And one of the differences that we talked about was that in a constitutional government, the Constitution is a binding document and it also limits the power of a leader. Okay, in a government that just has a constitution, we find that the Constitution just kind of sets up government, but it doesn't really limit the leader in any way, shape, or form. So in our government today, our leaders are limited by the United States Constitution. There are certain things that the president can't do. There are certain things that Congress and the Supreme Court can't do. Okay, so they are limited. We have a limited government instead of a government with absolute power. We also abide by this concept called the rule of law. And this tells us that, in very basic terms, that everyone is subject to and not above the law. So it doesn't matter who you are. If you're the President of the United States, if you are the Speaker of the House or the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, it doesn't matter. If you break the law, you have to be held accountable for that. So just because you're in those elected positions doesn't mean that you're somehow above the law. We also abide by the concept of due process, which means if you are charged with a crime, if it doesn't matter who you are, if you're charged with a crime, you have to be given due process. So you have to be given the right to defend yourself. You have to be given the right to an attorney. You have to be given the ability to face those who are accusing you in most situations. You have the right to remain silent, so you don't have to testify against yourself. So basically, the protection of due process prohibits the government or the law enforcement from saying, you know what, I don't like this person, so I'm going to throw them in jail and just leave them there forever without giving them the chance to defend themselves. So due process is a good thing. We also have the concept of judicial review, and we talked about this with Marbury v. Madison. Judicial review is one of those interesting things that's not actually in the Constitution, but it's still considered a constitutional principle because of the fact that it's basically, it was a precedent that has since been kind of adopted into our governing process. So the concept of judicial review, here's another wrap. Marbury v. Madison, what did it do? It established the principle of judicial review. Judicial review, what is that? The court's power to say what is whack. So judicial review is the authority of the federal court system to determine the constitutionality of acts of Congress or the president. And if the Supreme Court says, actually Congress or actually president, that's not in accordance with the Constitution, then that law or that act is thrown out the window, okay? So we also have the concepts of separation of powers and checks and balances. And these two work very, very closely together in that we have a separation or a division of governing authority. We spread that out over 3 branches, the legislative, executive, and judicial, to ensure that no one group gets too much power. And to kind of make sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing, we have a pretty intricate system of checks and balances, which we'll get to in our next video, which are designed to make sure that every branch has responsibilities in other branches in order to maintain the balance of power. So with that, I will stop with this video. If you guys have any questions, let me know.